Hello, everyone, and thanks for staying with us. Here's what's coming up on the program today. Turkey gives the nod for Finland and Sweden to be admitted into the North Atlantic Trade Organization, NATO. The UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson shares his thoughts on if Russia would have invaded Ukraine had President Putin been a woman. And record-breaking heatwave hits Japan. Welcome again to the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Let's bring you up to speed now on the latest developments on the Russia-Ukraine war. First off, NATO leaders have been meeting all day today, and they have something to cheer about. Turkey today gave its approval for Sweden and Finland to join the alliance. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg made the announcement this afternoon, saying that this demonstrates that the alliance's door is open. Both previously non-military aligned Nordic nations West are set to be formally invited to join NATO tomorrow, and it's all thanks to Turkey lifting its objections to their membership. The deal is a culmination of weeks of work and even a last-minute agreement yesterday. Meanwhile, the NATO also released a declaration at the end of its meeting today, saying the alliance will significantly increase deterrence and defense, and that the commitment to Article 5, which states that an attack on one NATO member is an attack on all, and that the commitment is ironclad. It also says Russia's attack on Ukraine gravely undermines international security and stability, and that Russia is the most significant and direct threat to allies' security and to peace and stability in the Euro-Atlantic area, and that NATO will continue and further step up political and practical support to Ukraine. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says NATO will strengthen its commitments to Ukraine, and the country can rely on NATO's continued support. He says Ukraine can count on NATO for as long as it takes. Well, let's get deeper into this. Finland's President Sauli Niinistö has been at the NATO Summit in Madrid. A country, as we mentioned earlier, is set to join the alliance. President Niinistö, the Swedish Prime Minister, and Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan, along with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, stayed up all night, finding a deal to assuage Turkey's concerns that the Nordic countries were too soft on extremist groups. They ended up signing a joint memorandum, which President Niinistö says underscores the commitment of Finland, Sweden and Turkey to extend their full support against threats to each other's security. He says becoming NATO allies will further strengthen this commitment. And before their meeting, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan said he wanted to see results and not empty talk.
We will make a decision today, or at least at the summit, to invite Finland and Sweden to become members. That's unprecedented quick. I think you can hardly find any other accession process with so few weeks between the application that happened mid-May and the invitation that will happen now. Then, of course, after the invitation, we need the ratification process in 30 parliaments. That always takes some time, but I expect also that to go rather quickly, because allies are ready to try to make that ratification process happen as quickly as possible.
This is very important and very significant decision of Finland and Sweden. We are very happy in Poland that they would like to join NATO, and I hope that the final decision will be today.
The first lesson really from today is that if Vladimir Putin was hoping that he would be getting less NATO on his western front as a result of his unprovoked illegal invasion of Ukraine, he's been proved completely wrong. He's getting more NATO. This is a historic summit in many ways, but we've already got two new members coming in, Finland and Sweden, a huge step forward for our alliance.
Leaders' reactions earlier today. In the meantime, staying with the NATO summit, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says NATO allies will continue providing aid, weapons and financial assistance to Ukraine so it can defend itself against Russia's brutal war of aggression. He made the comments hours after Sweden and Finland prepared to discuss fast-track membership of NATO after Turkey lifted the veto on them joining. Mr. Scholz, in his remarks earlier today, said Russia has violated Ukraine's sovereignty and and integrity with its brutal war of aggression, and it was only right the countries make their contributions so that Ukraine can defend itself with financial means, with humanitarian aid, and by providing weapons that Ukraine urgently needs. Well, the Finnish Prime Minister Pekka Haavisto spoke to reporters earlier today about the breakthrough in talks with Turkey, saying the main difficulty is to bridge differences on what each country defines as terrorism, referring, of course, to Finland and Sweden's bid to join NATO. The leaders agreed that Sweden and Finland amend their laws to toughen their approach to the PKK militants, for the countries not to impose embargo restrictions in the field of defense industry on Turkey, and to take concrete steps on the extradition of terrorist criminals.
It was 4 hours meeting, of course, and very complicated in the beginning, and all parties repeated their own positions and how they see the situation. And then after 2 hours, we felt that it's maybe not moving at all. And then we had a coffee break, and as always during the coffee break, great ideas come up. And then in the end, towards the end of the meeting, it was easier to come to the conclusion. And of course, we are very happy that we could do this together with Sweden, because one of our concerns from Finland was that if our processes will be separated, that's actually weakening our security, because we have a situation that Finland and Sweden has been cooperating on security and defense for a long time, and it would be very unnatural for us to be in different groups in the future. Well, the difficulty was, of course, that Turkey has their own definition about the terrorism and terrorist groups, and we couldn't agree on that definition because it's larger definition than the international or EU definitions. And in the end, we could separate those issues in the statement, and that actually were bringing us to the conclusion.
Well, as for the Swedish Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson, NATO will be better protected as a result of her country joining the alliance. Following the deal with Turkey, she says any increase in extraditions will depend on what information was received from Turkish authorities.
Today is an historic day for Sweden and for the Swedish people. When we become a member of NATO, that will increase the security for Sweden and the Swedish citizens. But more than that, it will increase the security for all NATO countries and for the citizens in all NATO countries, because Sweden will be a security provider to NATO. So I'm very much looking forward to the meeting today, but then also for the continuing process until Sweden will become a full member of NATO.
Also today, President Volodymyr Zelensky, speaking to NATO leaders, says his country still needs more weapons and money to defend itself against Russia, warning that Moscow's ambitions did not stop at Ukraine. He said Ukraine needed modern missile and air defense systems, and that by providing them, leaders can completely break Russia's tactics to destroy cities and terrorize Ukrainian civilians. I want to bring in now Foreign Affairs commentator Collins Aweke. He joins me from Brussels, which I understand security is watertight at. Sweden and Finland are ecstatic, Mr. Aweke. Turkey finally given its approval for them to join NATO. What could have happened, if this approval had been delayed?
What would have happened is that the uncertainty would have grown. That's number one. And of course, number two, which is, an obvious win. It would have meant an obvious win for, Vladimir Putin, because essentially he liked his goal, part of his goal essentially was to divide NATO and ensure that, they are seriously weakened. But his invasion of Ukraine, if there is one thing it has done, it is actually strengthening NATO. So a further delay would have meant that one way or the other, he was beginning to achieve his goal. But that didn't happen, and that show of unity that NATO has seen since the invasion is actually solidified even more. Some have actually called this the most consequential decision that NATO has had to take in a very, very long time. So, yes, this is significant.
Yeah, and the Swedish Prime Minister described it as historic. And NATO will settle down to fast-track their membership. So it says, on the average, how long could that take?
It would be foolish, of course, to try to, put a timeline on it. On the average, it would have taken between 3 to 4 years to get all the formalities done. Because what we're looking at here, Amarachi, is a situation where the 30 odd members of NATO would have to individually approve, the accession in their parliament. As you know, there is never unity, there is never convergence in these issues. In each and every one of those 30 countries, there are those on the left, there are those on the right of the political spectrum, and it is going to be all debates and so on and so forth. But the thing is this. This is expected to be expedited simply because everybody out here in Europe actually feels the threat that Putin and the invasion of Russia of Ukraine actually represent. So the question out in the air is which other country is going to be next. So I think this is something that has a very, very broad that enjoys a broad support. And so for that reason, I believe that the 30 parliaments will go into action, and it wouldn't surprise anybody if, for example, by this time next year, there is already very, very significant, progress made such that, within a year or less, their membership would have become a reality.
Well, I thought the point really was to stall Russia. I mean, to make Europe a bit uncomfortable for Russia, knowing that its immediate neighbors are members of NATO. So when you say this will take up until next year, who knows, the war might last until then. But Finland and Sweden have both promised Turkey, which has been the only country that objected to their membership of NATO, that they will toughen their approach to the PKK militants, something Turkey has been insistent about. Also for the countries not to impose embargo restrictions in the field of defense industry on Turkey, and also to take concrete steps on the extradition of terrorist criminals, which is what the Swedish Prime Minister has mentioned just earlier. Are these steps feasible? Do you think that these steps could be realized in the long run before NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg puts the final pen to paper approving Sweden and Finland's membership?
Well, there are difficult negotiations ahead. I think it's important to realize that and don't take any of those for granted. You see how much of a table shaker, indeed, that Turkey had been. Of course, we also need to look at it from Turkey's perspective, in the sense that they have, quite a loose definition of what terrorism means. And I will give you an example, that, the viewers in Africa, particularly in Nigeria, will relate to. And that is the designation of IPOB as a terrorist organization, which Nigeria did. Now, the objection that Nigeria's international allies have about that designation is the fact that it doesn't meet, as at the point that it was done, it didn't meet international standard, it doesn't meet diplomatic expectations, and so they distance themselves from it, while Nigeria felt very strongly about it. So the same could be said about Turkey's designation of PKK and other groups as a terrorist organization, whereas Finland and Sweden, and indeed the rest of the Western civilization, saw this more as people who were agitating for the minority rights that international law gave to them. Now, where we are right now is an agreement in principle that Turkey would have to make its case. The case that these are indeed, terrorist groups. It would have to be assessed and balance alongside their diplomatic expectations, but also international definition of terrorism. So I think it is the details. The devil will be in the details as far as this is concerned. But while all of that is going on, I believe that it is not going to hold back approval of Finland and Sweden joining NATO. And then one last point to make about this, Amarachi, is the fact that Turkey has an interest in all of this, because do not forget that drone, which Turkey has shown more and more specialization in, has become a foreign policy, a diplomacy tool for Turkey. So it is of national interest for them that their drones are sold both to NATO countries and other, allies. So there is something in this deal for them. Forget the grandstanding. They have done that, and by doing that, they were able to get them to the table. But I do not know that they can expect too much going forward.
Yeah, and it seems Turkey has achieved much more with NATO than it has with the European Union. But just another quick question on this, and that's, what this will mean also for other NATO allies. I mean, what Turkey is asking of Sweden and Finland, what would that mean for other NATO allies, and even for those who are not within the alliance of NATO?
Yeah, what it will mean is not something new in their relation with Turkey. I will cite just one example to keep it brief. Recently, about a year or two ago, Turkey took steps to threaten the EU to say, we are going to open the floodgate of refugees passing through our borders and going into Europe. The only way we are not going to do that is if you agree to some financial incentives, which they eventually managed to get. So holding the rest of Europe to ransom is nothing new. Now, what this means is that, they will be better prepared in their relationships with Turkey. I think they would want to strengthen areas where they, agree, and continue to work on those areas that they do not see eye to eye. But one central point here, Amarachi, is the fact that Turkey might have to adapt its definition of terrorism to suit its neighbors, or Turkey's neighbors would have to loosen their definition of terrorism to suit Turkey's demand. Your guess is as good as mine as to what they are going to do. So to a large extent, Turkey might be alone here if it is not ready to embrace the broader definition of terrorism to align with the rest of the world.
Indeed. And President Zelensky, he's been repeating these calls for weapons. He said it again today at the NATO Summit. He's been doing that for several days with his regular addresses on different platforms. Does it mean that perhaps there's much more talking going on behind the scenes than action?
Well, apart from the consistent call by Zelensky for more arms, particularly air defense system, there isn't very much evidence out there to support that, actions are not being taken, that it has been all talk. No, that is not the case. As a matter of fact, barring the support of the Western Alliance, I believe that Russia would have been done in Ukraine by now, and the whole country would have been overrun. But that is not the case. I believe that the strategy that Zelensky is using here is to continue to put soft pressure where it is feasible, and to use the soft pressure where that is also necessary. But I believe that, he is getting a lot of support. As a matter of fact, Norway recently, went into alliance with Britain to supply very, very significant air defense systems to Zelensky. And America has made pledges and has redeemed part of it, and they continue to work together on that. But what Zelensky is doing under the condition that he is can indeed be expected.
Yeah, and I think what he really is looking forward to is those HIMARS from the U.S. And these Western countries are afraid the target might be Russia. Collins Wiki, a pleasure having you on the program. Thank you again.
My pleasure to be with you, Amarachi. Thank you for having me.
Well, coming up after the break, we'll have more on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. There's so much happening. Plus, a former White House aide speaking before the House committee investigating the January 6th Capitol attack says the former U.S. president knew that some in the rally were armed. We'll discuss. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're staying a bit longer with the Russia-Ukraine invasion because there's so much going on. U.S. President Joe Biden says his country will ramp up efforts and equipment across Europe, including a new permanent army headquarters in Poland in response to threats from Russia. He said Washington would work with Spain to raise the number of U.S. destroyers based in the Rota naval base in Cadiz to 6 from 4 and send 2 additional F-35 squadrons to Britain. He also outlined changes that will continue to boost the number of U.S. forces, air defenses and other weapons in Poland, Romania, the Baltic states and other bases across Europe.
To that end, today I'm announcing the United States will enhance our force posture in Europe and respond to the changed security environment, as well as strengthening our collective security. Earlier this year, we surged 20,000 additional U.S. forces to Europe to bolster our alliance in response to Russia's aggressive move, bringing our force total in Europe to 100,000. We're going to continue to adjust our posture based on the threat in close consultation with our allies. Here in Spain, we're going to work with our ally to increase U.S. Navy destroyers stationed in Spain's Rota naval base from 4 to 6 destroyers. In Poland, we're going to establish a permanent headquarters for the U.S. 5th Army Corps and strengthening our U.S. NATO interoperability across the entire eastern flank. We're going to maintain additional rotational brigade, which is 3,000 fighters and another 2,000 personnel, combat team here in Europe, headquartered in Romania. And we're going to enhance our rotational deployments in the Baltic states. And we're going to send 2 additional F-35 squadrons to the UK and station additional air defense and other capabilities in Germany and in Italy. We're going to approve a new NATO strategic concept and reaffirm the unity and determination of our alliance to defend every inch of NATO territory. And Article 5 is sacrosanct, and we mean it when we say an attack against one is an attack against all, every inch.
That was U.S. President Joe Biden. Now, the Indonesian President Joko Widodo is in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, today for a visit that he hopes will rekindle peace talks between Russia and Ukraine and to explore ways to free up exports of grain to global market. President Widodo, better known as Jokowi, and his wife arrived in the Ukrainian capital by train. A video released, as we're seeing there, by the palace, showing his arrival and movement onto Kyiv to witness the destruction of civilian residential areas following Russia's invasion into Ukraine. President Widodo is the chair of the group of 20 nations and one of 6 world leaders in the United Nations appointed as champions of a global crisis response group formed to address the threat of hunger and destitution posed by the war in Ukraine. Now, before the war, Ukraine had been one of Indonesia's biggest wheat suppliers. President Widodo is scheduled to meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. That's before going on to Russia for talks with President Vladimir Putin. He intends to urge the Russian president to agree to a ceasefire. But at least 3 people have been killed, 5 more wounded by a Russian missile strike on a residential building in Ukraine's southern city of Mykolaiv. Local authorities have launched a rescue effort for survivors. Mayor Alexander Senkevich said 8 missiles had hit the city. He urged residents to evacuate as quickly as possible and also said the building appeared to have been hit by a Russian X-55 cruise missile. Videos from the scene showed smoke billowing from a 5-story building, with upper floor partly destroyed. Watch and rescue efforts taking place in Mykolaiv. International media cannot verify the authenticity of the video that was sent in earlier, but the date it was filmed, neither the date it was filmed nor the location of the footage. Now, Pope Francis has joined in condemning the bombing of a shopping mall in the Ukrainian city of Kremenchuk. This happened Monday. He's described it as barbaric. At least 18 people were killed in the attack, 60 more of them injured after it was hit by a Russian strike. Russia's defense ministry says it had legitimate military targets in the city and that the shopping mall was not in use. This, of course, contradicts what President Zelensky said, which is that about 1,000 people were inside the mall at the time of the attack. During his weekly address today, the Pope prayed the mad war end soon and that the Lord open those paths to dialogue that men either do not want or are not able to find. He said he hoped that the necessary measures will be implemented to deal with the emergencies and prevent future emergencies in Ukraine.
Che continua ad essere flagellata da barbari attacchi come quello che ha colpito il centro commerciale di Kremenchuk.
In the meantime, Russia's defense ministry is saying strikes carried out by Russian forces today hit so-called military training bases for foreign mercenaries near the southern city of Mykolaiv. Ukraine's National Emergency Service had reported at least 4 people died and in a 5-story residential building that was hit by a Russian strike. Just yesterday, the Defense Ministry denied hitting the shopping mall in Kremenchuk with missiles, saying it had struck a weapons depot and a subsequent explosion of ammunition had triggered a fire in the nearby mall, which they said was not functioning. At least 18 people, as we've reported, were killed on Monday in what Kyiv has described as a direct Russian missile strike against the busy shopping mall. Well, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been speaking and telling us his mind on what he thinks of the Russian President Vladimir Putin. He's explained the Russian invasion of Ukraine as a perfect example of toxic masculinity, trying to imagine what would have happened if President Vladimir Putin was a woman and not a man. He also does not think the war in Ukraine would end soon. Mr. Johnson was speaking on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Germany.
You need more women in positions of power. If Putin was a woman, which he obviously isn't, but if he were, I really don't think he would have embarked on a crazy macho war of invasion and violence in the way that he has. If you want a perfect example of toxic masculinity, it's what he's doing in Ukraine. I think it's not going to be easy. I'm not going to pretend that this can be done quickly. But I think what was so striking from the conversations is that people really do want to give the Ukrainians strategic endurance. And I think what everybody agrees is they want to give him, the Ukrainian government, we can't be more Ukrainian than the Ukrainian, right? You know, it's for them to decide. But they want to help Zelensky to get in the best possible position to talk if and when talks eventually come. And so that's the strategy right now. And you know, there is always going to be lots of opinions about that. And I'm just going to say that the faster it recedes behind us in the universe, we leave that event behind us, the better. And actually, I think the mood is really changing in a more positive way.
Let's switch gears now. The European Commission is willing to negotiate trading arrangements for Northern Ireland with Britain, but only if talks are constructive and do not restart with an outcome set by London. So says the Commission's Vice President, Maros Sefcovic. Sefcovic is due to deliver a speech in London later today, 2 days after legislation allowing Britain to scrap some of the rules on post-Brexit Northern Ireland trade passed the first of many parliamentary tests. He said his message in London will be that the Commission's proposals to reduce customs documentation and checks for goods travelling from Britain to its province, Northern Ireland, brought stability and legal certainty. It would also prevent the return of a hard border between Northern Ireland and the EU member Ireland, which has been avoided by keeping Northern Ireland in the EU single market for goods.
Our doors are open for the negotiations, but it has to be constructive negotiations, and it cannot be done in a way that, okay, we negotiate, but the result is given in advance, and the result, as it was presented in the bill, is completely unacceptable to the European Union, because it just simply breaches the international law and the most important agreements we have signed just 2 years ago.
To the United States now, where a former aide of former President Donald Trump dismissed concerns as some supporters gathered for his fiery speech outside the White House that day, that's January 6, carried AR-15 style rifles, instead asking security to stop screening attendees with magnetometers so the crowd would look larger. That's according to the aide. Hutchinson testified at the 6th day of House hearings into the deadly January 6 Capitol assault by Trump's followers, roused by his false claims his 2020 election defeat was the result of fraud. Dozens of courts, election officials, and reviews by Trump's own administration rejected his fraud claims, including outlandish stories about an Italian security firm and the late Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez tampering with his ballots. 4 people died in the day of the attack, one fatally shot by police, the other of natural causes. More than 100 police officers were injured. One died the next day. 4 officers later died by suicide. At the end of about 2 hours of testimony, Representative Liz Cheney, one of the 2 Republicans on the 9-member House panel, presented possible evidence of witness tampering and obstruction of justice.
In her role, working for the White House Chief of Staff, Ms. Hutchinson handled a vast number of sensitive issues.
I did. After Mr. Giuliani had left the campus that evening, I went back up to our office and I found Mr. Meadows in his office on the couch. He was scrolling through his phone. I remember leaning against the doorway and saying, I just had an interesting conversation with Rudy. Mark, sounds like we're going to go to the Capitol. He didn't look up from his phone and said something to the effect of, there's a lot going on, Cass, but I don't know. Things might get real bad on January 6th. The he in that text that I was referring to was the president.
And why was he furious, Ms. Hutchinson?
He was furious because he wanted the arena that we had on the Ellipse to be maxed out at capacity for all attendees. The advance team had relayed to him that the mags were free-flowing. Everybody who wanted to come in had already come in, but he still was angry about the extra space and wanted more people to come in.
Our Washington correspondent Maria Bird has been following this story. Maria, with every bit of testimony, we're learning more and more what happened on that day. And this hearings have been going on for a while now. Different committees, now this one, are trying to find out exactly what happened on that day, January 6th. How important is it to understand the progression of, how the riots happened and what happened after? I believe you are muted, Maria.
My apologies. Councilor Hutchinson is clearly one of the most vital testimonies that we've seen through these hearings that have been going on for quite some time. It is unclear whether or not It is exactly the way that she depicted it. It's very close to, I think, what we saw on that day of January the 6th. It's very clear that she was a very close aide to the president and his staff. And as we know, she has been under a great deal of scrutiny over the past few weeks and months. And so this young woman is really just trying to assist in the way that she can. And as you heard her describe, this even predated January 6th, where Mark Meadows said that there could be something really bad happening on January the 6th. And when you look at what she testified as far as the president being there and watching from the White House and saying that he wanted more people, more MAGA people there on the Capitol, and asking himself, he wanted to get to the Capitol. And so when you hear some of that, it's almost unimaginable to think that there was not some coordination and that the president is not going to be called, the former president is not going to be called forth to testify in this hearing. I think that there's so much evidence coming forth and so much information that it's going to become very vital that his immediate individuals in contact and himself, and obviously even the former vice president, will likely be called forth.
Did you say the president might be called forth to testify as well as the former vice president?
Yes, we can expect that that will likely be something that we hear in the next couple of weeks, especially if they're able to get enough information that will call that for a reason to be able to call him forth. Again, whether or not he will come, that is, to be seen. But now that he is no longer president, he could be called forth for this hearing.
And will it be important that he be there? Must he appear before the House committee if he's invited?
Yes, he will be. If he's invited, he will be called before the House committee. Now, again, he can deny and he can, but it will depend on if they subpoena him and how far the committee will go to secure his presence at the hearing.
Yeah, and back to Cassidy Hutchinson, Maria. She worked at the White House. She was in the room with the president, as you said, just even before the riots happened. But then she talked about, everybody who needed to come in had already come in. There were other staff with the president, of course, at that point. They were watching what was going on, the riots as it unfolded, in the Capitol. And was there any point at all, because I know this is not the first of the first testifier in the hearings we've heard, was there at any point that any of the staff members called the president to the point that, this could go awry and that people could get hurt?
Yes, you can see that. I mean, even from what we hear, his daughter was stating that there could be some real ramifications and devastating impacts, as we know happened. And so there were many aides and many of the staffers of the president that were trying to get him to call it off. And so I think that's what we're going to hear more of during these hearings as to what his staff was requesting. Because if you look at the testimony of Cassidy Hutchinson, it really almost is that he was a lone ranger operating and kind of forcing his team to operate in the way he was requesting. And oftentimes they were not responding in the way in which he felt they should be. And so you can even see how the vice president just continued forth. And so this is going to definitely come down to, was this just the intent of the president? Were there other individuals supporting him? We've heard, obviously, some of the role of Rudy Giuliani, which I think they're going to cast that in a way in which it was almost as if he was supporting the president. But there are going to be many others, as Cassidy Hutchinson has come forward, that were part of the ones that did not want or were trying to steer the former president in another direction.
And what would happen at the end of the hearing, at the end of the special committee? What's expected to happen?
Well, what's expected to happen is some sort of conclusive evidence, and whether or not there will be any charges brought forth. I think that is the real question. This is a historic time in American history. As you said, this hearing has been going on for quite some time. But at the end of this, and I think we're getting very close, and definitely by the end of the calendar year, we can see some sort of summary of this and whether or not charges will be brought forth. And for the first time in American history, if we will see charges brought forth against our president, his immediate staff, and how large this will go. We know this has been paired up with the Watergate, but I think this is still very different. And we're talking about, lives that were lost at the insurrection of the Capitol and the first insurrection in American history.
Will there at any point, be witnesses called in, perhaps people who were injured or whose loved ones died in the incident on January 6th? Will they also be called in to testify before the committee?
That will likely, if it does happen toward the end, as more of a, unfortunately, to call it an emotional plea, as you mentioned, as they start to culminate this process. But as of this time, they're going to heavily focus on the hardcore facts, really trying to get those individuals that were with the former President Trump during that time so that they could potentially get some sort of testimony either from him, Vice President, or those who are very close to him, additional individuals that are very close to him. And so some of that, as you said, the injured would likely happen later on in the case if possible.
Maria, thanks again. I'm sure there will be more developments from the hearings. Let's take a break now. Still ahead on The World Today.
Alexis.
Well, South Africans love to shop so much that not even COVID can break this love affair. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching The World Today. A French court is preparing to hand down verdicts against 20 men accused of involvement in the 2015 Paris attacks, which saw 130 people killed. Among the accused is Salah Abdeslam, seen as the key suspect and the only suspected attacker to have survived. He told the court this week that he was not a murderer nor a killer, and that to convict him of that would be an injustice. The trial, the biggest in modern French history, began last September. For more than 9 months, victims, journalists, and even families of the dead have lined up outside the specially built courtroom in Paris to piece together the story of the worst attack in France since World War II. A combination of gun and bomb attacks across bars, restaurants, the National Football Stadium, and Bataclan music venue on November 13, 2015, saw hundreds injured alongside those killed. Hundreds of people have marched in a funeral procession for a Palestinian militant killed by Israeli forces in the West Bank city of Jenin. Israeli soldiers shot and killed the man, claimed by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad militant group as one of its men in the latest in a series of clashes. The Islamic Jihad said the man died confronting the occupation forces in Jenin, where military raids have increased after men from the area carried out several deadly street attacks on Israelis. The Israeli military said its forces, which had been conducting counter-terrorism activities, responded with live fire towards a number of Palestinian suspects who were throwing explosives at them. U.S. brokered peace talks aimed at establishing a Palestinian state in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza collapsed in 2014 and have shown no sign of revival. Israel and Palestinian leaders are expected to meet separately next month with President Joe Biden during his visit to the region. Natural disasters. Now Austria's southern region of Katrina has been hit by a mudslide. There it is. Following heavy rains during the night, a video film from a police helicopter captured the destruction caused by the mudslide and the extent of weather catastrophe. Muddy brown water rushed past houses and cars were stuck on debris-filled and flooded roads in this video released by the police. Carinthia police have confirmed the death of one unidentified man so far. It is a different case in Asia. People using fans and every means to get cool. Tokyo residents turning now to ice desserts to get some respite as a record-breaking June heat wave persists for a fifth day and fears grow about a shortage of electricity to keep air conditioners on. Long lines formed outside Saika, a Japanese shaved ice restaurant in Tokyo's traditional Asakusa area, as customers waited patiently to eat its signature dessert to stay cool. Japan braced for its hottest day yet of a record-breaking June heat wave, and Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has called for a ramp-up of nuclear power use. As some manufacturers announced plans to scale back production to save electricity, temperatures of around 40 degrees Celsius were predicted in areas surrounding Tokyo on the fifth day of a heat wave that is seeing the Japanese capital sizzle under its worst June heat since records began in 1875. The Meteorological Agency has forecast that Tokyo temperatures will not drop back to 30 degrees Celsius until at least next week. And sadly, the bodies of 20 migrants who got lost in the Libyan desert near Chad have been found. The bodies were discovered by a truck driver traveling through the desert and were recovered on Tuesday about 320 kilometers southwest of Kufra and 120 kilometers from the border with Chad. Officials say the driver got lost. It's believed the group died in the desert about 14 days ago, since the last call on a mobile phone there was on June 13. 2 of the bodies were Libyans, the others believed to be migrants from Chad crossing illegally into Libya. Well, COVID-19 lockdowns and restrictions on public spaces seemed to many experts a golden opportunity for e-commerce to finally take hold. That's in South Africa. Now, though traditional retail is roaring back, defying a global trend, South African retailers are doubling down on brick-and-mortar expansion plans, abstaining from the retail apocalypse fears that are gripping other markets.
With 2 days until its official opening to the public, workers rushed to put finishing touches on the Kwena Square shopping complex, a shiny $13 million sign that South Africans are defying the global retail apocalypse. Not even COVID-19 could stop them from their beloved malls. The South African market has evolved differently from many other places in the world. High crime rates and a scarcity of safe public spaces have long driven both retailers and shoppers into commercial complexes. The attachment to malls has confounded the expectations of many industry players who saw lockdowns in South Africa, initially amongst the world's strictest, as an opportunity for e-commerce to finally take hold and take significant bites into traditional sales. In fact, some leading players are now doubling down on brick-and-mortar expansion plans in Africa's most developed economy, a 1 trillion rand retail market.
Certainly, I think in light of growth of turnovers and uptick in foot count, retailers' expansion into new stores, I don't see the mall as we get. I think it's still very relevant to the group.
The new spaces include a string of malls that are due to open this year, including Ocean Malls in the coastal city of Durban and another one in Pretoria. The pandemic gave e-commerce a massive global boost. This public relations account manager is among the South Africans who are returning in force to malls following the easing of COVID-19 restrictions.
It's not just about shopping, it's also about experiences. Going into a discount and smelling the fragrance is not the same as being online and you actually guessing, unless you know what the fragrance actually smells like. We still want to be out there as people and socialize. Even if you're not talking to people per se, you still want to go and just do stuff, just buy and look at stuff.
The resilience of South African malls isn't simply down to e-commerce's difficult path, though with the security they offer, is still a big attraction at a time when the country's historically high crime rate show little signs of abating.
Well, I don't know who loves the malls more, whether the shoppers in South Africa or the malls or the shoppers here in Lagos. If you tried visiting one of them recently, you'd be surprised. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.